Through the watchful eye of the lens and across the front lines of innovation, we uncover the ultimate truth. Prepare to explore the most significant historical moments that changed the trajectory of mankind.
Step out of the vehicle, ma'am.
Officer, I have not been drinking. I passed your test.
I smell marijuana. I'm searching the vehicle. You have no probable cause. Turn around. You're under arrest.
I am a federal judge. This is a serious mistake.
Yeah, sure.
The dashboard camera was already recording when Officer Michael Stevens noticed a silver sedan driving down Maple Street at exactly 3:47 that Tuesday afternoon. What looked like a simple traffic stop in the quiet suburban town of Westfield would soon turn into a major federal case, one that would cost the city almost $1 million and completely ruin one man's career. The woman driving had no idea that she was about to become the focus of a story that would uncover years of misconduct, cause nationwide anger, and prove that justice sometimes comes with a price people can't ignore. Before we get into this unbelievable story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. The woman behind the wheel was Judge Angela Washington, a 52-year-old federal judge, had spent the last 15 years handling some of the most serious cases in the district. She was known as intelligent, respected, and hardworking. She had started her career as a public defender and worked her way up to the federal bench through determination and a strong belief in justice. That afternoon, she was simply driving home from the courthouse after a long day of hearings, looking forward to a peaceful evening with her family. Judge Washington had lived in Westfield for more than 10 years. She knew the area well, attended community meetings, and had even spoken at the local high school's career day. Her home was on a quiet, tree-lined street where neighbors knew each other by name and kids played safely in their yards. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever happened. The biggest news was usually about the yearly block party or someone fixing up their garden. Officer Michael Stevens had been with the Westfield Police Department for 12 years. He was 38 years old, married, had 2 children, and lived a couple of towns away. On paper, he appeared to be a solid officer, with a clean record and awards for community service. But what his personnel file didn't show was a troubling pattern of behavior that had been ignored, hidden, or brushed aside by supervisors who chose silence over accountability. That Tuesday started like any normal day for both of them. Judge Washington had finished a complicated securities fraud case, reviewed documents for the following week, and stopped at the courthouse coffee shop before heading to her car. Officer Stevens was patrolling Sector 10, one of the wealthier areas of town, where calls were usually about noise complaints or small car accidents. Neither of them could have imagined how their paths would cross that afternoon. The speed limit on Maple Street was 35 miles per hour. Judge Washington was driving 37, just 2 miles over the limit. It was the kind of small violation most officers would overlook, especially in a quiet neighborhood with little traffic and no danger. But Officer Stevens didn't let it go. Dash cam footage later showed him turning on his lights and following her car. Judge Washington noticed the police vehicle behind her and felt the familiar nervous feeling that many people get when they see flashing lights, even when they know they've done nothing wrong. She checked her speed, realized she may have been slightly over the limit, and safely pulled over. She put her car in park, turned off the engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel, where they were clearly visible. After years in the justice system, she knew exactly how traffic stops were supposed to work. Officer Stevens walked up to the driver's side window with his hand resting on his gun. This was the first warning sign. Department rules called for a calm and relaxed approach during minor traffic stops, not the aggressive stance used in dangerous situations. Judge Washington rolled down her window and waited quietly. The entire conversation was recorded on the officer's body camera, though the footage wouldn't be seen until much later. Stevens asked for her license and registration without explaining why she had been stopped. Judge Washington politely asked what the reason for the stop was, a question any driver has the right to ask. Stevens told her to stop asking questions and just hand over her documents. Judge Washington gave him her license and registration. Her license clearly showed that she was a federal judge, including the official title. Stevens looked at it for several seconds, long enough to read everything. But instead of calming down, his attitude seemed to get worse. This is where the situation took a disturbing turn. Rather than recognizing her position and adjusting his behavior, Officer Stevens appeared annoyed by her credentials. He asked if the license was real, suggesting it might be fake. Judge Washington stayed calm despite the insult and confirmed that the license was valid and that she was a federal judge. Stevens then did something no reasonable officer would do during a simple traffic stop. He ordered Judge Washington to step out of the vehicle. She asked why that was necessary for such a minor speeding issue, pointing out that she had cooperated fully. Stevens raised his voice and warned her that if she didn't comply immediately, she would be arrested for obstruction. Judge Washington understood her rights better than most people. She knew that ordering someone out of their car required a real safety concern or suspicion of a crime, neither of which existed. But she also knew that arguing with an angry officer on the side of the road could be dangerous. So she followed his command and stepped out of the car. Once outside, Stevens told her to place her hands on the hood and spread her legs. Judge Washington was stunned. This position was used for criminal searches, not traffic stops. She asked what she was being arrested for since she hadn't committed a crime. Stevens avoided the question and said she was being detained for investigation. The body camera footage shows Judge Washington standing there calmly, keeping her dignity despite the humiliating situation. She remained respectful as Stevens conducted an unnecessary and invasive search. He patted her down, checked her pockets, her jacket, and even her shoes. He found nothing illegal, only normal personal items like a phone, keys, a small purse, wallet, and cash. But Stevens still wasn't done. He told her he needed to search her vehicle for contraband. Judge Washington informed him that he had no legal right to search her car without probable cause or her consent, neither of which existed in this situation. Stevens claimed that Judge Washington's refusal to give consent was suspicious behavior and that it gave him the right to search her car. This claim was completely false. It went against basic constitutional law that every police officer is trained to understand. By this point, several neighbors had noticed the situation and stepped outside to see what was happening. Many of them recognized Judge Washington from local events and couldn't understand why she was being treated like a criminal. One neighbor, an elderly man named Robert Chan who lived across the street, began recording the incident on his phone. When Stevens saw that he was being filmed, his attitude became even more aggressive. Quick question for those watching. Have you ever seen something like this happen in your own neighborhood? Type yes in the comments if you have. Stevens ordered the neighbor to stop recording and move away from the area. The neighbor calmly refused, knowing that he had the legal right to record police activity from a public place. Stevens then made a radio call asking for backup. He claimed he was dealing with an uncooperative suspect and hostile civilians who were interfering with his investigation. This was the moment when what should have been nothing more than a simple traffic ticket began to spiral completely out of control. Throughout all of this, Judge Washington stayed calm on the outside, but inside, she was fully aware of what was happening. As a federal judge, she had handled many cases involving police misconduct, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority. Now, she was experiencing firsthand the kind of treatment that far too many citizens, especially people of color, faced during routine police encounters. The irony was painful. She spent her career making sure justice was upheld, yet now she was being subjected to clear injustice. Within minutes, two more police vehicles arrived, bringing the total number of officers on scene to 3, all for what started as a minor speeding violation. Judge Washington watched as Stevens spoke quietly with the other officers, pointing toward her and the growing group of neighbors. She couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language made it clear they were planning their next steps instead of trying to calm the situation. One of the responding officers, Officer Janet Rodriguez, approached Judge Washington and asked for her side of the story. This gave Judge Washington a brief sense of hope that someone reasonable had arrived. She calmly explained that she had been stopped for allegedly driving 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. She said she had provided all requested documents, including identification showing she was a federal judge and that she had been cooperative from the start. She also explained that Officer Stevens had unnecessarily escalated the situation and was now detaining her without probable cause. Officer Rodriguez reviewed Judge Washington's license and registration and noticed the federal judge designation. She looked confused and walked back to speak with Stevens. The conversation between the officers was tense, even though their voices were low. Rodriguez appeared to be questioning Stevens' decisions, while Stevens continued insisting that Judge Washington had been uncooperative. The third officer on scene, Sergeant David Palmer, was the senior officer and officially in charge. He approached Judge Washington and asked her to explain what had happened from the beginning. Once again, she calmly repeated her account, maintaining her professional tone despite how unreasonable the situation had become. Sergeant Palmer listened closely and occasionally glanced at Stevens with a look that suggested concern or uncertainty. What happened next would become the most controversial moment of the entire incident and the foundation of the federal lawsuit that followed. Even though it was clear that Judge Washington had done nothing wrong and posed no threat, Sergeant Palmer made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his career. Instead of ending the detention and apologizing, he chose to support Officer Stevens. Sergeant Palmer told Judge Washington that she was under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. These charges had no real basis, especially since she had cooperated with every lawful order. Judge Washington asked what specific actions counted as obstruction or resistance, pointing out that the body camera footage would clearly show her compliance. Sergeant Palmer couldn't give a clear answer, but the arrest continued anyway. Judge Washington was handcuffed behind her back and placed in the rear seat of Stevens' patrol car as neighbors watched in shock. Seeing a respected federal judge arrested on her own street sent waves of disbelief through the community. Robert Chen continued recording despite repeated orders to stop, capturing video that would later become critical evidence. Other neighbors also began taking photos and videos, creating a detailed record of what many would later describe as one of the worst examples of racial profiling they had ever seen. One neighbor, Sarah Thompson, who lived next door to Judge Washington, was so upset by what she witnessed that she immediately called Judge Washington's husband to tell him what had happened. She also contacted a local news station, correctly believing that the story would attract major public attention. Within hours, the incident would be making headlines across the entire region. Judge Washington was taken to the Westfield Police Department and processed like any other suspect. She was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell while officers decided what to do next. The booking officer, a young woman with only 2 years on the force, looked visibly uncomfortable. She recognized Judge Washington's name from court cases and news reports and understood that arresting a federal judge required serious justification. Meanwhile, the police department's leadership went into crisis mode. Chief Thomas Bradley received multiple calls within the first hour, including one from the mayor's office and another from the district attorney. Everyone wanted answers about why a federal judge was sitting in a jail cell on charges that appeared to have no legal support. Chief Bradley reviewed the dash cam and body camera footage, and what he saw immediately concerned him. The video clearly showed that Judge Washington had remained calm, respectful, and fully cooperative throughout the entire encounter. There was no evidence of obstruction, resistance, or any other criminal behavior. Instead, the video clearly showed Officer Stevens turning a simple traffic stop into an unnecessary and aggressive confrontation. What made it even more troubling was the appearance that his actions were influenced by Judge Washington's race and her professional status. Chief Bradley quickly realized that his department was facing a lawsuit that could financially devastate the city. Judge Washington spent 4 hours in police custody before being released on her own recognizance. The charges against her were quietly dropped the very next day, but the harm had already been done. News of her arrest spread rapidly through the legal community. Federal judges, attorneys, and civil rights advocates began demanding explanations. Even people who were familiar with long-standing issues in law enforcement were shocked by the level of misconduct revealed in this case. Within a week, the first lawsuit was filed. Judge Washington, represented by a team of well-known civil rights attorneys, sued Officer Stevens, Sergeant Palmer, Officer Rodriguez, and the city of Westfield. The lawsuit claimed violations of her constitutional rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments. It detailed how she had been racially profiled, unlawfully detained, subjected to excessive force, and falsely arrested without any valid law enforcement reason. As the legal discovery process began, new information surfaced that made the case even more damaging for the defense. Officer Stevens' personnel file contained multiple complaints from citizens who accused him of racial bias and excessive force. These complaints had repeatedly been dismissed or resulted in little to no discipline. Internal emails showed that supervisors were aware of Stevens' behavior but failed to step in or correct it. Department data also revealed that Stevens stopped black drivers at a much higher rate than other officers working in the same areas. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence was a text message exchange between Stevens and another officer from several months earlier. In these messages, Stevens made openly racist remarks about black residents living in wealthy neighborhoods. He suggested they didn't belong there and were likely involved in criminal activity. These messages revealed a clear pattern of racial hostility and helped explain his treatment of Judge Washington. The defense strategy used by the city and the officers was predictable and ineffective. They argued that Stevens was acting within his authority, that Judge Washington had been argumentative and uncooperative, and that the arrest was justified based on her behavior. This argument collapsed once the body camera footage was shown in court. The video clearly demonstrated that Judge Washington had been polite, calm, and cooperative throughout the entire encounter. The trial lasted 3 weeks and drew national attention. Legal experts appeared on television to discuss the case, and civil rights organizations pointed to it as a clear example of ongoing racial bias in policing. The courtroom was packed every day with lawyers, reporters, and community members who wanted to witness what many believed was a landmark case. Judge Washington's testimony was powerful and composed. She spoke about the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood and the fear she felt when Officer Stevens became aggressive. She also discussed the broader meaning of what had happened, explaining that she had heard similar stories from defendants throughout her career. Experiencing it herself gave her a deeper understanding of how widespread and systemic these issues truly were. Officer Stevens' testimony, on the other hand, was disastrous. Under cross-examination, he could not give a clear or reasonable explanation for why he escalated the traffic stop. He failed to explain why he ordered Judge Washington out of her car, searched her person and vehicle, or arrested her when no crime had occurred. His answers were inconsistent and evasive, and it became obvious that he was making excuses as he went along. Police training experts also testified, stating that Stevens' actions violated basic law enforcement standards. They explained that traffic stops should be handled with professionalism and respect, that searches require consent or probable cause, and that arrests should only happen when there is real evidence of criminal activity. According to these experts, Stevens' behavior failed every professional guideline. Several neighbors testified as well, confirming Judge Washington's version of events and directly contradicting claims that she had been uncooperative. Their statements painted a picture of a respected community member being humiliated by officers who appeared determined to assert power rather than follow the law. The most impactful testimony came from other victims of Stevens' behavior. 3 black citizens described being stopped, searched, and harassed by him under similar circumstances. Their stories showed a clear pattern of targeting black drivers, using minor violations as excuses, and conducting unnecessary searches meant to intimidate rather than protect. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before reaching a verdict in favor of Judge Washington on all counts. They ruled that the officers had violated her constitutional rights and that the city was responsible for failing to properly train and supervise its police force. The damage award of $830,000 sent a strong message that racial profiling and police misconduct would not be tolerated. But the financial judgment was only the beginning of the consequences. Officer Stevens was fired immediately after the verdict, and his law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. He would never work as a police officer again, and his actions made him unemployable in many other fields. Sergeant Palmer was demoted and suspended without pay for 6 months, effectively ending his chances for promotion. Officer Rodriguez was also disciplined for failing to intervene, and was required to complete extensive retraining. Just days after the verdict, Chief Bradley announced his early retirement, stating that new leadership was necessary to rebuild public trust. The mayor then established a civilian oversight board to review police practices, introduce reforms designed to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. The city also agreed to fund comprehensive bias training for every police officer, and to update its policies on traffic stops and arrests. The case became a turning point, leading to broader changes in how police departments across the country handled complaints and disciplined officers. Judge Washington used her public platform to push for criminal justice reform, speaking at universities and conferences about the importance of accountability in law enforcement. She also created a scholarship fund for law students from underrepresented communities who wanted to pursue careers in civil rights law. Have you ever been treated unfairly by someone in a position of authority? Let me know in the comments what you think about how this case was handled. The impact of the case continued for years. Several additional lawsuits were filed against the Westfield Police Department by citizens who had been mistreated by Stevens and other officers. The federal government launched an investigation into the department's practices, which led to even more reforms and oversight. The incident became a case study in law schools and police academies used to teach future professionals about constitutional rights and proper conduct. For Judge Washington, the experience was both deeply painful and life-changing. She had always understood that racial bias existed within the criminal justice system, but experiencing it herself gave her a deeper and more personal understanding. It shaped her decisions on the bench, making her more attentive to claims of police misconduct and more willing to question law enforcement testimony when it seemed unclear or inconsistent. The incident also influenced other federal judges. Judge Washington's colleagues began asking tougher questions in cases involving police conduct. Seeing how even a respected federal judge could be treated this way opened their eyes to what ordinary citizens, without legal knowledge or professional status, often experience. Media coverage of the case was widespread and largely supportive of Judge Washington. Editorial boards across the country criticized the officer's actions and praised the jury's decision. Still, not everyone agreed. Some law enforcement groups argued that the damage award was too high and claimed it would make officers afraid to do their jobs. Those arguments carried little weight given the overwhelming evidence of misconduct shown during the trial. Judge Washington received hundreds of letters and emails from people sharing their own experiences with police profiling and abuse. Many thanked her for standing up and seeking justice, pointing out that most people in her position would have accepted the mistreatment and moved on. Her decision to take legal action gave a voice to countless individuals who had suffered similar treatment but lacked the resources or influence to fight back. The financial impact on the city was serious but manageable. The $830,000 judgment, combined with legal fees and the cost of reforms, totaled well over $1 million. City leaders acknowledged that allowing such behavior to continue would have been far more costly in the long run, both financially and in terms of public trust. Officer Stevens struggled to find work after losing his badge. His name became permanently tied to the case, making him unemployable. In law enforcement and most other jobs that required public trust, he eventually moved to another state and found work in construction, earning far less than he had as a police officer. The stress of unemployment, public shame, and financial strain took a toll on his family and contributed to serious personal difficulties. The Westfield community was divided in its response. Most residents supported Judge Washington and condemned the officer's action, but a vocal minority defended Stevens and claimed he was unfairly targeted. They argued that police work was dangerous and that officers deserved the benefit of the doubt. However, the body camera footage made that argument difficult to support, clearly showing that Stevens had plenty of time to assess the situation and choose a different path. Judge Washington's husband, Dr. Marcus Washington, a respected surgeon at the local medical center, became an unexpected advocate for police reform. He had always been moderate in his views and generally supportive of law enforcement. Watching his wife be treated like a criminal changed his perspective. He began speaking at community events and medical conferences about the physical, mental health effects of police misconduct and racial stress on minority communities. The case also underscored the importance of civilian oversight in policing. For years, the Westfield Police Department had operated with little outside supervision, allowing officers like Stevens to continue harmful behavior without real consequences. The Civilian Review Board created after the case provided an independent way to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. Training reforms followed as well. Officers were required to complete 40 hours of additional training each year with a strong focus on de-escalation, implicit bias, constitutional rights, and proper procedures. New policies required supervisors to review body camera footage from all traffic stops involving arrests or use of force. Data collection became another key reform. Officer stop patterns were regularly reviewed for signs of racial bias, and those showing concerning trends were flagged for further training or investigation. This data-driven approach helped identify problems early, reducing the chances of future lawsuits and restoring trust within the community. The incident also had a lasting impact on Judge Washington's approach to the law. She became more cautious about accepting prosecutorial claims and more willing to exclude evidence gathered through questionable police methods. Defense attorneys began referencing her case when arguing that their clients had experienced similar misconduct. Because of her personal experience, those arguments carried more weight than abstract legal theories ever could. Young lawyers and law students often asked Judge Washington how the incident changed her view of justice. She told them that experiencing injustice firsthand had made her a stronger and more thoughtful judge. It helped her better understand the real-world impact of legal decisions and deepened her commitment to making sure the law protected everyone equally, no matter their race or social status. The case also became a regular topic in legal ethics classes. Professors used it to spark discussions about judicial conduct and professional responsibility. Should judges who experience police misconduct step aside from similar cases? How much should personal experience influence legal decisions? There were no easy answers, but Judge Washington's case gave students a real-world example to analyze and debate. 5 years after the incident, Judge Washington was appointed to a federal commission focused on police reform and community relations. Her unique position as both a federal judge and a victim of misconduct made her voice especially valuable. The commission's recommendations influenced federal policies and funding decisions, expanding the impact of her case far beyond Westfield. The neighborhood where the incident took place also changed over time. Property values dropped at first as negative publicity made some buyers hesitant. But after the city implemented real reforms, confidence returned. Eventually, the area became known not for police misconduct, but as a model for improved community and police relations. Officer Rodriguez, who had witnessed Stevens' behavior but failed to intervene, struggled with guilt for years. She eventually left law enforcement and became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping victims of violence and discrimination. She openly spoke about the importance of speaking up when wrongdoing occurred, using her own failure as a lesson for others in positions of authority. The body camera footage from the incident was used in police academies across the country as an example of how not to handle a traffic stop. Instructors paused the video at key moments and asked trainees how the situation could have been handled differently. Over time, the footage became one of the most widely used training tools in law enforcement education. Sergeant Palmer's demotion and suspension affected more than just his career. He had been well respected in his community and volunteered as a youth sports coach. After the incident, he was asked to step down from those roles, and his reputation never fully recovered. He later transferred to a small rural department, where he finished his career without further controversy, but never regained his previous rank. The civil rights attorneys who represented Judge Washington used the case to build a legal practice focused on police misconduct. The high-profile verdict encouraged other victims to come forward, leading to additional lawsuits across the region. The legal precedent set by the case made it easier for others to seek justice and compensation. Community activists also used the case as a rallying point. They organized meetings to track whether promised reforms were actually being carried out. Their continued pressure ensured that changes were meaningful, not just symbolic, even after public attention began to fade. The incident influenced how other federal judges evaluated law enforcement testimony. Judges who once gave officers the benefit of the doubt became more willing to question inconsistencies and demand supporting evidence. Knowing that even a federal judge could be treated this way made them more open to misconduct claims from ordinary citizens. Judge Washington's experience deeply resonated with professional women of color across the country. Many saw their own experiences reflected in her story. She was invited to speak at conferences for lawyers, judges, and executives where she discussed not only the legal issues, but also the personal strength required to challenge powerful systems. The financial cost to the city included more than the damages and legal fees. Implementing reforms, training programs, civilian oversight boards, and data systems required ongoing investment. City officials concluded that these costs were far less than what unchecked misconduct would have cost in lawsuits and lost public trust. The case also highlighted the need for diverse leadership within police departments. Westfield's command staff had been mostly white and male for decades, contributing to a culture that ignored racial bias. Recruiting and promoting officers from diverse backgrounds became a priority. Progress was slow and sometimes resisted, but even insurance companies began demanding stronger oversight and training after seeing the financial impact of cases like this one. Despite her legal victory, the emotional effects on Judge Washington lasted for years. She continued to feel anxiety during routine police encounters. The incident shattered her sense of safety and showed her that status and knowledge could not fully protect her from bias or abuse of power. Years later, when asked about the most important lesson from her experience, Judge Washington said it showed both how fragile and how resilient justice can be. The system failed her at first, allowing bias to override rights and professionalism. But eventually, that same system created accountability and change, proving that progress is possible. The case remains part of legal education and police training nationwide. It became a key example in discussions about race, power, and accountability in America. What do you think about the long-term impact of Judge Washington's decision to fight back? Let me know in the comments if you believe cases like this lead to real change. So there you have it. A simple traffic stop on Maple Street turned into an $830,000 lesson on the cost of racism and abuse of power. Judge Angela Washington went from driving 2 miles over the speed limit to becoming the center of a landmark civil rights case that reshaped an entire police department and influenced law enforcement nationwide. Officer Michael Stevens believed he could humiliate a successful black woman without consequences. He was wrong. His moment of bias cost him his career, his reputation, and his future. The city of Westfield learned that tolerating discrimination comes with a price it could barely afford, and the legal system showed that sometimes accountability actually works. But this story isn't just about money or justice for one person. It's about the courage to stand up when you're treated unfairly, even when fighting back is exhausting. Judge Washington could have stayed silent and moved on. Instead, she chose to fight not just for herself, but for everyone who came after her. Because of her courage, reforms were put in place, training changed, and awareness grew across the country. One woman refused to let racism win. Her case became a blueprint for accountability and a reminder that no one should ever have to endure what she experienced that Tuesday afternoon. What you just heard was powerful, but the case on the right takes things even further, a situation so extreme it left even seasoned investigators stunned.
Every official report and carefully curated archive carries a profound narrative eagerly waiting for an audience. At the very core of every narrative is the fundamental, unwavering search for truth. We sincerely thank you for taking the time to seek that truth with us today.